this in The Guardian. You can see they're at the bottom. Sean of the Reds, Forest ready to make Dyche their third manager of the season. Yes, he has verbally agreed to take over at the City ground. And Nuno Woe, West Ham left in 19th after dismal defeat to Brentford. Brentford actually picking up their first away league win of the season. To the front page of the Telegraph Sports section. And yes, again, that Nottingham Forest story as they turn to Dyche, and it appears to be a 2-year contract for the former Burnley and Everton boss. So look at the Times. Willis set for 160k despite England's snub. Yes, Steve Borthwick, who's the England head coach in rugby union, has said that he's refusing to pick Tom Willis, who's number 8, because he is heading over to Bordeaux-Bègles from Saracens next summer. Hard home truths for West Ham. Yes, you can see Jared Bowen there pictured as they go down 2-0 at home to Brentford. And yes, 2 years for Dyche at Forest, top right. And in the Sun, Sean Penn is the headline. Dyche to sign on as Forest's next boss. He's got his hands up there with fingers as if he's an umpire, signalling 6 runs in cricket. Let's hope it's not 6 and out, they say. Okay. Next boss, Hammer's new home horror, and also Jose's happy to tune them down. That's all the stories in the Sun for tomorrow morning. Okay. Right, only one place to start. Hello again, Miguel and David, and that is Sean Dyche, who is almost certain at this point, as the time of recording, to become Nottingham Forest's new head coach, as of when this is confirmed. And David, it does look like this is going to be confirmed now. Evangelos Marinakis did really want Marco Silva. Looks like he's ended up with the former Burnley and Everton boss. Very, very different characters, very, very different styles of football.
Yeah, as far as I know, David, it's done for all intents and purposes. I think it will probably be announced in the morning. I don't know if the tragic death of Stuart Pearce's son had anything to do with the delay, but Stuart Pearce and Dyche were former teammates. They know each other well and are friends. So condolences on that, of course. But yeah, Dyche is the man for Forest now. And it feels like a pragmatic appointment of a fairly pragmatic coach with no disrespect at all. His record speaks for itself as an established Premier League manager with Burnley and Everton, experience of Europe as well, getting out of difficult situations, and the sort of metrics and data that Forest would have been sifting through. It was Edu leading the process with George Sirianos, the sort of global head of football and global technical director, would have pointed them to a coach who has similarities to Nuno. And we know what he did at the club, although it didn't end too well if you look at his results. And they're going to try and tighten up defensively, improve their set pieces, working with the former striker that he's been with before in Chris Wood. Morgan Gibbs-White, a player he previously tried to sign at Everton, some England internationals, of course, Elliot Anderson, and a huge amount of recruitment that's gone on there, and many of the big names didn't even make it into this squad on Saturday. But yeah, Marco Silva is a coach that Evangelos Marinakis knows really well on a personal level. He had him at Olympiacos. He's looked at him in the past at Forest and may have done so on this occasion. They would have been prepared to pay some compensation, but I reported today that it's actually around £15 million, the release clause in Marco Silva's Fulham contract. Fulham wouldn't want to negotiate. They're in the middle of a season. I'm not sure the timing would have been right for Silva, and Fulham want to renew his contract. There's been no sort of advanced talks at this point, but that could happen at some point with him out of contract in the summer. So it's Dyche. Contracts until 2027, so it's not a short-term fix, and they'll be desperate that he proves to be the right man for them. He's got a place locally, so the area is familiar to him. He's got a link to the club because he was there as a youth player. His assistants, Steve Stone and Ian Wone, are legends of the club, and they'll be desperate that finally they get this right after a poor start to the season.
Miguel, some of the tabloids are going on with this sort of like rolling the dice or dice roll. I mean, is it much of a gamble? You know, we say we always know what we get with Sean Dyche. Is he the most sort of dependable character in this kind of situation which Nottingham Forest found themselves in, or are there any weaknesses there you can point to?
I mean, well, if anything, yeah, it's a bit of a return to some semblance of security. Certainly defensive security, given one of the main issues with Postecoglou's football. There is a bit of romance to the story, given that Dyche is a boyhood fan. He's always been his ambition to manage Forest, from what I understand. Although people mightn't necessarily think there's much romance to the football. And I do have to say, when you zoom out a little, it's a bit circuitous and almost a little bit, you'd say, a waste of time, really, to go from Nuno and his specific style of football, tonight's result notwithstanding, to a totally different style in Postecoglou, and now back to Dyche. And I mean, okay, you can understand why they've done it right now, because the squad is suited to a certain type of football. And certainly when you look at some of the kind of key metrics, like kind of ball progression, transitions, Dyche is obviously so much closer to Nuno, but it probably doesn't speak to maybe the sense of kind of progress that maybe Marinakis, the owner, and the football leadership at Forest wanted, when Nuno was moved on, or what they would have considered the ambitions for the season, the summer. But I suppose the context has changed now, because almost a quarter of the way into the season, or really, close to a third of the way into the season, they're just above the relegation zone. So suddenly there are different expectations, and they've had to revert a little bit. I do wonder as well whether there's an element of kind of future elements aligning. Whether, okay, it's not right for Silva now, and I've heard the same as David, that he wasn't necessarily all that willing to move mid-season. Obviously, Fulham didn't want to negotiate either. But perhaps there might be an opportunity there in the summer, because I suppose if Forest do want to eventually evolve to what people would say is a more progressive style of football, one of the flaws, I'd say, with the Postecoglou appointment was that it was extreme to extreme. Nuno was one end of the spectrum in terms of tactics. Postecoglou was the other. Whereas Silva actually represents, a bit more of a pragmatic manager in the middle of that. So it would make more sense. And if they can't get him now, it does make sense to revert to Dyche, even if he can still question the first 8 weeks of the season.
Just wonder, David, how much of a challenge will this be for Sean Dyche? Not just given their predicament, we've seen that before when he took over Everton. But the one difference here is that he's also got to manage European football. And he's got a squad which was sort of very, very hastily assembled towards the end of the transfer window. So how do the players fit the style that he would want to implement? And how will he be able to juggle energies and minutes over the course of the season?
Yeah, it's particularly difficult without a pre-season, and that was a fact that afflicted Ange Postecoglou as well. There's just no time to barely even train and get to know these players. And of course, they had such strong bonds with Nuno Espirito Santo, which was another factor that worked against Postecoglou. Dyche does have a tiny bit of European experience, having led Burnley there, although they didn't get through the qualifiers. And it will be a huge challenge, possibly the most exciting of his career, judging by the quality that he inherits. £200 million spent on this squad in the summer, following heavy investment previously as well, ever since they came up to the Premier League. And if you look across that team, there's quality in pretty much all areas. Of course, they've had a bit of injury problems to the likes of Ola Aina, but when you see the players that didn't even make the bench on Saturday, Hutchinson and Bakwa, James McAtee and Callum Wendo, then there are players for Sean Dyche to come in and work with. And Dyche maybe gets a bit of an unfair rap. He's been very sort of economical. He's worked with the players that he's had at his disposal, and he tends to get the best out of them. And that was something that I'm sure Forest and Edu and George Sirianos, who led this process, looked into very thoroughly. And now he's got sort of better tools at his disposal. And it doesn't surprise me that managers would be interested in this post because of that quality. And that's why Mancini, we're told, had a level of interest as well. But I think for the circumstances that Forest find themselves in, and the meetings that would have taken place with Dyche to, really decide on his readiness for this role, and for not falling where Ange Postecoglou did, I think is actually a pretty good appointment in the circumstances. And the fact that it wasn't led by Marinakis himself, which was the case with Ange Postecoglou, given their personal relationship, it's going to be a test of the others in that hierarchy. And actually, despite the fact, as you mentioned, I think Sean Dyche will be licking his lips at this opportunity.
OK, let's move on to the Monday night football. Let's go to the Times, shall we, and just to see what they're saying about this one. The picture of Jarrod Bowen just there with his sort of hand over his mouth. And you can see also the headline at the bottom there, hard home truths to West Ham. Jarrod Bowen suffers and protesting fans boycott Nuno Espirito Santo's first home game as Brentford run out 2-0 winners at the London Stadium. Yeah, this was a very, very bad night at the office for Nuno and co, wasn't it, Miguel?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also become clear, while I would maybe have some reservations about Nuno's style personally, it's become clear that West Ham have bigger problems than any manager. And really, that's been true for some time. There's been issues in recruitment, kind of the way the squad is. And just there's also kind of this sense of kind of gloom engulfing the club. And on the other side of that, I think one thing that must be stressed, especially as we are talking about managers so much tonight, Keith Andrews has done actually a very, very good job already at Brentford. Some big wins. And in what was... Okay, everyone talks about Brentford as a kind of a model club in that sense, but this was his first job and made a lot of doubt about his appointment. And tonight was just another really good performance. I mean, what was so striking about it, they were so utterly dominant, which is all the more damning for West Ham, really. That it was so dominant, in fact, that when they didn't add to that initial goal, it almost, like for so long, especially with that goal ruled out at the end of the first half, it felt like it had the kind of feel of just one of those nights where because they don't get the second, they get caught out, but they just didn't allow West Ham to do it. And it's obviously such a contrast between both clubs, right? Everything at Brentford looks so unified and to a plan, including the appointment of Andrews himself. Whereas at West Ham, I mean, essentially we talk about going from style to style. Well, what does like Potter to Nuno represent? And that after Lopetegui, after kind of even the kind of long before that, the Moyes, Pellegrini back and forth. And it does feel like West Ham just can't seem to escape this cycle, even though I suppose a lot of people would have been screaming that certain decisions should have been obvious from the club for years.
Let's have a little look at the home side of this, the home form. You know, the London Stadium. So 4th straight defeat there, David. The protests, loads of empty seats as well. Toxic is a very overused word, but you know, it feels like it's not far from that. And West Ham always seem to flirt with this at their home stadium. This could be critical, couldn't it, this season?
Yeah, I'm not sure who was more protesting, the fans or the players of West Ham tonight, because they didn't turn up either. And you mentioned that home record. It stretches back, to February since they last won there? Have I got that right? Maybe 9 matches. So it's a real problem and renews the conversation about, you know, how attached West Ham were to Upton Park, and they've never really taken to the London Stadium. You know, I'm not dismissing what they did under David Moyes by any means and the European glory, but in terms of the connection with the fan base, the atmosphere, the distance from the stands to the pitch, it's not there. And West Ham are in a precarious position now. They're in the relegation zone. They've got some tough fixtures coming up. They seem bereft of the sort of lift you would imagine when somebody like Nuno Espirito Santo takes over. Okay, he had a couple of early matches, which was hard to make much impact on, but he's had more than 2 weeks now to work with the team. I know there was an international break, but to prepare, he made a number of changes at the start of the game, half-time and during the match, and it didn't really seem to impact it. Somerville's now back from injury, but, you know, struggling to find much of an impact and no recognised striker in the absence of Fulkrug, and we know the quality that Jarrod Bowen possesses, but it's not easy on his own pretty much. And you know, Paquetá not making the sort of contribution that we've come to know him for. So maybe they'll be trying to get through to January and give Nuno some recruitment to try and boost this season. Otherwise, they're in major trouble, David. And I don't think when you combine what you're seeing on the pitch with what is happening off the pitch that they could be in relegation trouble. Clearly, there's enough quality to get away from it, but we're not seeing it right now, and they need to urgently up their game.
Yes. Worst start to a home league campaign in their history, West Ham United. All right, thank you very much indeed for the moment, Miguel and David. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll take a look at more of the sports stories in the morning's newspapers, including this in the Mirror. Simmering art tries not to boil over. The Arsenal boss says that he has had to learn to control his temper. Mikel Arteta will look ahead to Arsenal's Champions League match against Atletico Madrid, and we know who their head coach is. It's only Diego Simeone. We're back in a couple of minutes. You're watching Back Pages Tonight. Welcome back to you at home. Welcome back to the Independent's chief football writer, Miguel Delaney, the Athletics football correspondent, David Ornstein. OK, we're going to talk Champions League, guys. Let's go to the Mirror. And Arsenal, who face their toughest test yet in the Champions League this campaign, having beaten Athletic Club 2-0 away from home and then 2-0 against Olympiacos at home. You can see that on the left-hand side, simmering art tries not to boil over. Mikel Arteta said he's had to learn to bite his tongue, bite his lip, just try and kind of keep his emotions in check. I wonder how much of a challenge will that be, Miguel Delaney, when you've got Diego Simeone in the other dugout?
And for the extent of the challenge, you only have to look at the last time that at Simeone was in England, which is about a month ago when they played Liverpool, lost in the last few minutes. And I think as Simeone admitted himself, the emotion of the night got to him. There were scenes of him, he seemed to be kind of gesturing at the crowd afterwards. I think that's probably quite a kind way of describing it, or a gentle way of describing it. And he regularly, gets abrasive and confrontational on the line. Arteta maybe doesn't quite get confrontational in the way Simeone does, but you do hear from other Premier League clubs about how they aren't necessarily the greatest fans of some of Arteta's energy on the line and how active Arsenal can be. So put those together, and it might well be a test of this new Zen Arteta. Of course, I mean, it's a lot easier to be Zen when you're winning games and you aren't suffering kind of frustrations that Arsenal have maybe last season. As regards the game itself, it's a bit of an odd one because I think the Champions League at this point, it's a bit of a strange competition in that you don't really know the true consequence of any result until much later. And most of that, look, these two sides are almost certain to be in the knockouts, if not necessarily the guaranteed final eight, in it, no matter what happens. But still, there's an edge to the game and maybe a real edge to the sideline.
Back page of the Star, argy-bargy time, Arsenal versus Atletico Madrid. Gooners be warned, cop scrapper Simeone promises to cause damage at the Emirates. I just wonder, this sort of psychological element, David. Thinking about just, how he is just one of those great anti-heroes, isn't he, Diego Simeone? He loves to upset the apple cart. He loves to upset duopolies. He loves to just, get in amongst it and disrupt. But, how do you think that might derail Arsenal if he kind of gets the edge in that psychological battle in the dugouts?
Well, I was at the game against Liverpool at Anfield, and he almost ended up in the crowd at the end, didn't he, Simeone? And it does get to the players, staff, fans. Arsenal have matured really nicely under Arteta, and they're at home, I think. Arteta has been full of praise for Simeone before the match. I'm not sure the views of Atletico reciprocated after they found not to have any hot water in the showers at the Emirates Stadium after their training session this evening, and were pretty disgruntled at having to head back to their hotel to shower, which is another element to the maybe the psychological battle before this match. But Arsenal, they're at a stage now where I'd expect them to be the superior footballing team tomorrow night. Let's see how they react from a character point of view, because as Arteta said in his comments this afternoon, Atletico fight for every single ball and you cannot switch off. And we saw what happened. Liverpool lost a 2-goal lead. They eventually edged it. And Simeone kicks every ball, heads every ball, and his team embody himself. And so it should be a brilliant game, actually. But Arsenal this season, with their quality and their strength in depth, the way they're leading the Premier League, I'd expect them to put on another good performance, and they should really come through irrespective of the excellent team that Simeone always puts out.
Let's go to a former Arsenal striker in Danny Welbeck. This in the Mirror, John Cross and James Welling's piece. Danny Welbeck proving he can solve Thomas Tuchel's England striker conundrum. Yes, if Harry Kane were to get injured, then it does leave them light there, really, doesn't it? But Danny Welbeck would be 35, Miguel, by the time that the World Cup rolls around. Do you take him?
At the moment, I would. I don't think age is necessarily an issue, especially given actually a trend in modern years has been for experienced typers of a certain type strikers, should I say, to go quite a distance in their career. You only have to look at Lewandowski, and obviously the most obvious one of all, Ronaldo. I'm obviously not saying Welbeck is Ronaldo, but it's an illustration of longevity in the modern game that comes from also being in the right setting. And he would say that's exactly what Brighton are for Welbeck. I mean, much is obviously made about how of Brighton's recruitment and how they can spot young, promising players that will go to the next level. But Welbeck is actually an example of the other side of this, and how a player who many probably would be considered to be kind of entering his kind of final years can actually excel in a setting like that. And like, I actually think this is the best form of his career. Certainly, I think it's more prolific than he's been for some time. There's just like this real life and expressiveness to his game. And yeah, like on form, on performance, he's up there with any other candidate, really, from even obviously kind of young, promising players who are injured, like Liam Delap. Welbeck has as good a case right now.
David, really briefly, what's your take on this? Could he go?
I think he deserves to go. It's one England position that doesn't have the depth that you see in other positions. He's scoring from starts. He's got one of the best records in Premier League history at scoring off the bench. A brilliant character, a leader. He's in great physical shape. Technically, he's at the top of his game. And so if I was Thomas Tuchel, I would definitely be looking on current form anyway to be taking Danny Welbeck to the World Cup.
OK, got a couple of minutes to discuss Danny Röhl. In fact, I'm going to stick with you, David, because you've done a piece on this in The Athletic. So it's the former Sheffield Wednesday head coach who is now in charge of Rangers at Ibrox, out of one frying pan into another fire, you could argue. And it didn't appear like he was their first choice at all, David.
I think furnace more than fire. It was Steven Gerrard initially, and then Röhl did come into the equation, and of course there were some other candidates like Muscat, but Röhl has got the nod despite the toxicity and the febrile atmosphere up at Ibrox at the moment. But this is a really good coach, 36 years old. Yep, he's sort of shown himself at Sheffield Wednesday in the second tier, but also as assistant for the Germany national team, Southampton, Bayern Munich, and they're scarred by the Russell Martin experience, the Rangers fans. But Danny Röhl has the potential to be a top coach. And I'm sure Rangers will be hoping and thinking that finally at the end of this protracted process that they've got themselves a good fit, and boy, do they need to get winning matches.
Back page of the Scottish Daily Mail, a roll of the dice. I mean, how much of a gamble is this, Miguel, briefly?
I actually don't think that much of a gamble, at least as regards the manager. I think he's a brilliant coach. He was crucial to Bayern winning the Champions League in 2020, and you can actually see that that Flick is actually not the same manager without him, I would say, and his pressing. And maybe the bigger gamble is for him, given Rangers' well-publicised issues, the state of the squad now, and obviously they want to go to do something different, but appointing a manager like this, I would say, is a coup.
And as a Sheffield Wednesday fan, let me just weigh in on this briefly. 3 out of 39 points to start the season when he took over, and it was a terrible situation. And then, of course, managed to stay up. And even Charlie Austin has said that, when he was assisting Ralph Hasenhüttl, he was the one coming up with the tactics. It's just that he couldn't speak that good English at that point, and Hasenhüttl was just there, effectively translating for him. Strange, but he's clearly got some pedigree in the early parts of his career, certainly given who he has been underneath as an assistant. OK, we're going to leave that there. Thank you very much indeed, Miguel. Thank you very much indeed, David. If you missed any of the show, another chance to see Back Pages tonight, 1:30. Show's also available as a pod. Just download Back Pages, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts.